Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to The Reality of Change Orders webinar, day 2. My name is Millie Boiten, Product Marketing Specialist on MEP. Again, before we get started, I'd just like to go over a few housekeeping items. Please submit any questions that you have throughout the webinar to our form, and I will go ahead and put the link to that in the chat box right now. You can use that to ask any questions, and we'll answer those tomorrow on day 3 of this webinar series. The webinar series will be recorded and they will be distributed in a follow-up email. And again, I'm joined by Robin Reinhardt, Electrical Sales Manager, and he's going to moderate today's session again.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back. I'm hoping that you all got something out of yesterday and got to at least have some things to think about over the evening. There's some probably new faces joining us here today, so just quickly, a quick introduction. I'm Robin Reinhardt, 36 plus years in the electrical construction industry, from helper all the way through VP. I have held a sales position with Trimble AccuBid for the last 24 years. I'm currently the sales manager of the Eastern region for the estimating solutions electrically. I reside in Tennessee. Kind of a quick review over yesterday, a day in review. We went over the issues and events of the direct change orders. These are change orders from owners directed down to us. We went over constructive change orders, typically issues that we find that we need clarification and are pushed up. Importance of the pre-construction and the best practice for pre-construction. Hopefully that was hit a mark for a lot of you. Labor and labor risk, cost impact of altered schedules, the impact of scheduling changes on our resources, how to use measure mile to help you claim loss of production, as well as true costs of estimating there on the very end. Today, what I'd like you to do is open up your camera on your cell phone, snap an image of this, and it should take you directly to this website where this question will be presented to you here in a moment. I'm just going to leave this up for just a little bit longer so you can do that. But the question we'd like to kind of get a response from is, why do you feel change order pricing should be different than estimating or risk estimates? So I'll put that question up there, and I will get us to that site. Yep, there you go. That is scope, impact. So looking at these responses, it's right on target, just kind of what we expect. A lot of what we kind of went over yesterday as well. So today, my goal is to start providing you some tools, giving you some calculations and lists of things to consider. In the heat of the battle, we tend to jump to the go-to elements, the ones that we kicked on pretty hard yesterday: the overhead, the shift impact, the risk of that. So that's great. Extra supervision, big one. A lot of you have responded to that, and I agree. That's great. So let's get to some of those tools. Myself back organized here. Now, This image came from a presentation that Giovanni did, and I just thought this was the greatest image. I'm sure some of you've seen it. I've been in different people's offices, and they've actually had this in an image on the wall. This is obviously how the outside world perceives our situation. I think that that little original contract is what we were successful getting the project with, and then we try to make all our money in change orders. Matter of fact, some of my clients actually feel that way. I've seen people say that they have bid projects under cost or at cost with no consideration of profit or risk assessment because they're anticipating these change orders to feed them. So that is real. Typically, that typically is a misnomer, obviously. If we just take a look at an easy numbers here, $1 million job, and you were to take that at, let's say, 900,000, leaving 10% out, and then you were to do every change order with given gross percentage of 20% gain on, which would be pretty aggressive, even in today's world to do so, you would have to have sold another $500,000 worth of value to make up that 10% that you gave up on bid day. So once again, those numbers are simple, easy, and there's some reality into that, but that's still a very drastic increase than work that I have to do to make up that loss. So let's not be doing that. Let's leave the money in the projects initially. The real cost of these change orders, many contractors believe that they make money in. Like I said, they just don't. Now, some of them are usually small, so these things get past us pretty frequently. There are little change orders that are constantly coming in. So that's where we kind of get lost in the woods there a little bit in seeing what the real impact is. We get it off our plate. We know that the field's handled it, and we don't even think about it. We don't go back and track to see how much of that impact that might have had in our ripple effect on the project. You wouldn't, like I said, everybody's going to get a piece. A lot of times they're coming to you for that change order because they've already gone to the engineer, and the engineer's told them, I'm going to charge you X to redesign that or put that even on a drawing as an addendum. So instead of paying them, they come to us, issue us a change to do that, and then require us to do that to the drawings so that we can get through our inspections and, of course, get our as-built and do that heavier work in the back end of that. So, again, make sure you put those elements into your pricing proposals. So this is a common misnomer why we think using higher labor units that we'd make change orders or value off that, charge a marginally higher labor rate, use trade service column 3, the higher column and trade service are all pricer, and then of course are putting our 10 and 10 on markup on it. And is that really enough? No, it's obviously not enough. Based on what you guys in your response, you see all the downstream impact that has on us. The contractors, we're all like most everybody else, we're trying to please our customers. So sometimes stopping to get written approval for change orders during the construction process is seen as almost an invasion on the client, and we want to reserve that. So we will often say, well, listen, we'll get the work done, we'll negotiate this price in good faith later. Or quite frankly, some of us will just admit that we just didn't have the time to do the paperwork and we jumped on the problem and dealt with this do it later, I'm doing finger quotes there, approach to this. It leads to a huge amount of time, hence lost profitability, that we spend on the back end of the job trying to resolve these disputes. And we've also shifted the power into the client's hands on negotiation because we've already done that commitment, and we don't have really any recourse to, go and pull that piece of equipment out or whatever that I've heard a lot of us say, I'm just going to go and jerk that service off that building. He never paid me for it. Obviously, you'll end up in jail. But a lot of this can be, once again, avoided if we simply issue those changes. And remember, you're doing them a favor as well. You're letting them know the valuation of what that is so they can then make informed decision on whether they really need that change that they think they do in their project. Many disputes between us have resulted into a lot of litigation, loss of reputation, those type of things. But in a lot of cases, you are dealing with somebody, not the general contractor that's managing it, but the actual owner that might not be somebody that you cross paths with again. So don't be afraid to, like I said, stand your ground and support the realization of the cost. In any business transaction, obviously, there's two sides, the buyer and the seller. We all see this from different viewpoints. Now, during that negotiation and the digression of it, it becomes kind of a power struggle. And a lot of times the owner is going to fall back on what we said yesterday, the golden rule. You as a gold makes the rule. But we must convey our fair value. We must use this, and we'll talk about some negotiation skills here in a little bit. But one point that I want to bring up in today's world is that we tend to lean on email much more heavily than we should at this stage. We will fire off an email and maybe think that that makes a point of record. We introduce the problem by email, and then we sit back and wait for responses. You're just causing more delays for yourself. Don't be afraid to pick up that phone, reach out, or meet the client. Obviously, in today's world, that might be through virtual meetings, but get that information directly to them, help them, and watch their body language to help them understand or look for the signs that they're not getting or that they're getting their collars up a little bit. Now, obviously, use email, follow up all those conversations so that you do have and keep that point of record, as well as giving another opportunity for clarification on procedures and moving forward. But don't run to that email tool right away. Keep this a human interaction. Firing off those mounds of emails or even paperwork, some of us are still doing that, just causes us delay. One tip in this is try to relate to their business. I used the analogy yesterday of a automotive plant producing cars, and it gives a nice analogy. It's something that we all quickly related to, but most businesses have the exact same scenarios in their place. So whether it's a shoe manufacturer, whether it's Baxter Pharmaceuticals that is cranking out medicine, we all have some kind of process in place that's made them efficient. They can understand that process, so don't be afraid to relate your situation to theirs. It does help open clarity. Now, we're going to get through a couple things here first. One of them is this unit price scenario. Why are we still giving unit prices for changes and allowing them to be part of our contracts? We really do, as an industry, need to stand up to this practice. Simply put, is the value that you're putting on that change order or that ad and or deduct is fixed. And yet yesterday and further today, we're going to discuss that asking for a change is during the duration of the project is going to change the value of that change. I asked for an ad at the beginning where I can plan it into the material purchasing, I can plan it into progression of work. My labor goes up and they carry this additional material with them, but they're doing the same installations, the rough-in, the wire pulling, whatever they might be doing at that stage. Is much different value than if I make that alteration at 70% completion of the project, where I'm going back over, worrying about services, simply just carrying material from one place. When I'm going up on that floor initially, I can pretty much walk that material from the point of entry straight across because I'm not having to work around anything but maybe studs. Later, we got drywall, we've got wall finishes, we've got things that we have to concern ourselves with. I can't just throw two bundles up on my shoulder and bounce through. Now I'm using two people or watching both ends of that or whatever it is that's slowing my progression down. So simple illustration there, but something we all relate to. So when we lock ourselves down in these ads or these deducts, we're just feeding the wrong side of the machine. We're feeding the client side and not our bottom line. So let's talk about credits. The real cost of credit isn't always a savings. When providing a credit cost, you must and you really should be using your bid day value. If you bid this project 6 months ago, and in the last years we've seen copper go up and down and really do some hurt on some projects because of the copper prices increased so greatly, I can't be given back value that I didn't actually have. So being able to go back to that estimate that I have locked down, that's time stamped, and I can work a credit value using those original values is the important thing to do here and represent. The story I'll share with you is early in my career, 20 some years ago, Giovanni Marcelli was doing a presentation of change orders with a group of clients. And one of the clients had brought one of his counterparts, an engineer he was working with, to this as well. During this presentation, I was watching the body language of the attendees, and this one individual was just climbing up. He was looking to the point where I thought he was going to explode. And he finally just stood up and he says, now, all you've been talking about is ads. You've been talking about how you got to recover costs on all these ads over and over. And he said, what is it you're going to do for me when I ask you to remove that fixture off the project? And Giovanni straightforward said, why do you think that's a savings? And then he went through this list. Now, this list I'm sharing with you is obviously, just a representation, but going through this type of thing and going through this type of narrative is helpful for you sometimes to explain your situation with the client and open their eyes. He systematically said, these are the different actions, and let's just take a little bit of time that each of these actions require. Now, at the end of that, I've got, in this case, 7 hours of activity. That original fixture had 0.85 man hours on it, maybe even an hour associated with it. So my total man hours differential is 6. My cost of labor, as we're going to go through, is $81. That's $500. Quite frankly, that value of that fixture, unless it's greater than $500, is going to be cut from that value. And then the truth of the matter is that more than likely we're not going to get any value out of that, because we're not going to move that fixture off the project site right away. We're going to keep it in the trailer. We're going to use it for parts, pieces, or a replacement of another damaged fixture. And at the very end, that will come back and hopefully we can get 10 cents, 20 cents, 30 cents on the dollar. But being, like I said, conservative there, saying that we're going to pay at least restocking fees on that if we can get any value at all. So 2 things I learned was to use that tool. Second thing I learned is in doing these presentations, make sure you talk about this first before you start talking about all the ad costs. So we got that out of the way. The one illustration I will talk about in using the job bid day value was a quick situation that happened in West Palm Beach on a school project I was managing, where we had a very large, extensive duct bank. They concrete encased it. They put galvanized piping for all the emergency systems. They were tying these different buildings together, and we were adding a building on the project. That's what the contract was, and all this interconnectivity between the buildings. They realized they didn't have enough classroom to hold the students. They were in a panic as the school board. They wanted to add another floor to that building to offset that, and then they needed to pay for it. So they looked at this duct bank and said, hey, do we really need this? And so they asked for credit. Now, one of my project managers on the project had already issued a credit on a very small valuation on the project, and he used the most recent copper pricing. He used the values that you would on an ad. So he used column 3 labor, he used trade service column 3 pricing, and offered this credit because the change order happened to be an ad plus, so or deduct and with an ad plus on it. So it still came out as a positive change order, but it did set a precedent, and it ended up that I had to go and stand in front of the school board on live TV in West Palm Beach and try to explain to them why I could not give them back this duct bank, which literally would have paid for the development of that second floor if we had carried it out at those change order rates. Luckily for us, there was a contractor on the school board who helped me get the rest of the school board to understand the valuation that we're talking about here. So careful not to get yourself in that trap. All right. All labor units are based on an assumption that the work will be done in a logical sequence. So those NECA labor units that we're using to validate this, these are done by tracking a journeyman, going out, seeing it in the progression of the work, putting these 30-year labor surveys together, and that's what's provided us that backbone that we rely so heavily on. We need to make sure that we have the right material, tools, and manpower for those labor units to be valid. If not, those labor units are now going to start to suffer. So for that, we need to make sure that we compare, communicate, and coordinate, and make sure that we have those values on there. Processing the change order. Just the cost of actually doing a change order has job cost value to it. This is not overhead. Once again, I'm not going to go through all these. I'm going to leave these for you to read, as well as Millie told you, you'll have the ability to download these. So we're going to have quite a few lists here that I'm presenting to you to help you in your day-to-day. But like I said, we're not going to spend the time reading through all those today. I think you all understand those, but maybe there's a few new ideas that you haven't seen. All right, we've kind of talked about this. NECA labor units, the trade service column 3, the charging for tools and equipment, most often thinking that we're going to make money on it is an illusion. Now, we do need to analyze the hidden costs, and we do need to make sure that we keep bringing those to the forefront. If 15% of your contract value changes, do you add just 15% more management to the project? No, typically it's going to be a greater value than that. But what happens to this labor? We haven't heard this statement on a job. If they just leave me alone, I could get something done, that go-to guy. And the reference yesterday that I talked about, once again, we do need to rely on these go-to people to help us get and make sure we don't take a big hit in our schedules, but be also sensitive that you don't overwhelm that individual, because like I said, the morale and attitude is typically keyed off of those type of people on your teams. So make sure that you float some of that supervision or that response around on your teams. Now, the real cost change order, like I said, higher cost of material due to small purchasing quantities. We're not going to get the same value we did when we did the buyout on the project. Then, of course, procuring and delivering these materials, constantly getting shipments every day of things when we could have gotten one shipment to deal for the entire week. Now we're getting substantial and have to have somebody sign, receive, suspension of work, work out of sequence, higher costs to perform those job costs. Now, some of the tools that you have available to you is things like trade service, a comprehensive material database. They've got literally over 1 million items, but standardizing this price off of column 3 or the AMP price, which is the average market price, is going to be your best representation. It is something that we can provide, and I recommend that you do provide services to your clients for trade service. Meaning in your contract signing, there's nothing wrong with making an attachment for that, for them to have a link to this pricing and be able to look up these items that we're submitting on. That's a much better option than having them call up the local supplier and never knowing what that local supplier is going to spit out as far as the price. Some will spit out the column 3 price as their counter price. Others, depending on who you might get in there, might spit out more seasoned price, a price that's meant for a reoccurring client. Now, NECA currently has the labor units. NECA labor units also hosted by Trade Service. If you are a NECA member, that's the only requirement. You can have those labor units presented to you as well. So if you have new material items that are being added to your database, you'll have the opportunity to carry those NECA labor units into there as well. For the rest of us that aren't NECA members, I do suggest that you go out and get the NECA manuals from construction labor books or labor websites, construction book websites. Get both the standard NECA manual, but also get the change order NECA manual. Now, these NECA labor units are based on actual tracked labor. The third column is the most difficult column. Now, there's 3 columns within NECA, 1, 2, and 3. Normal, difficult, and very difficult. You don't have to jump to the very difficult right out of the gate. if you look at the change order NECA manual in the front, they explain the differences between the normal, difficult, and very difficult scenario. It's suggested in there that you use column 1 up to about a 20 to 30% completion point of the project, knowing that the project is now changed and shifted to a point where now we're dealing with more obstacles, that kind of stuff. So we shift to column 2, then we make a shift to column 3 at that 60 point or 50 to 60 point percent markups or completion of the project. That is probably become more the standard than jumping right to 3 and trying to justify that right out of the gate, especially, like I said, when we are kind of rolling into this, and a lot of the changes at the initial are things that we're bringing to light to the client, and last thing we need to is corroborate them, but at the same time, know that if you do make that change, you have set some precedents that you're going to now need to explain. And having that labor manual is very helpful in helping explain that. Now, in the documentations, in the documentation review, we all tend to do a very good job reading this initially when we put our estimates together, and then we tend to set them aside, hoping that the estimate has been dealing with these considerations, and then oftentimes maybe the project management team will pick that back up and reread that. Owners will occasionally reread that prior to contract sign, but not nearly as often as we need to be. Don't forget about those contract documents and bring to light, start narrating for yourself, noting for yourself some of the concerns and conditions and things that we want to start getting in front of our clients as far as cost changes on this project. Direct costs and changes. Now, these are some of the lists that I was talking about that I'm not going to be reading through here today, but as you take a look at these, I'm sure a lot of them jump out as common things, others maybe not. And gas and oil, for example, bonding and insurances, even retainage interest, the ability to put a cost on that money that, in a sense, they're holding for us and keeping out of our bank accounts. We incurred interest on that money as well. Indirect and consequential costs. Once again, I'm not going to go through all these lists, but there are there for you. Do not forget about negotiating costs. So commonly in change orders, I would have, let's say, a management cost of $95 an hour in my change order for supervision of the project. On my negotiation line, I'd put 170, 250. I would take a look at the number of projects that I was managing. If that was the only project, fine. But normally I was managing 2 or 3 projects under my wing. The total value might be $2.5 million. The point I was trying to make to the client is every time you call me in here to do a negotiation, there's going to be a hiccup or a loss of production because somebody on one of my other projects is probably looking, trying to reach me, trying to get a decision to make a execution in a timely manner. So it actually came to face-to-face negotiations would be the approach I did on the very first change orders. I made the point of turning off my, I might date myself here, but that back then it was a beeper. Today's cell phone, I would set it down. I would make a note on my tab that I was, we're going to go in this, and eventually get to the point where you're quite frankly kicking this dead horse. You know that we've come to impedance, and I would simply say, Mr. Owner, Mr. Client, listen, this is really where we're at. The longer we talk about this, I'm going to have to add actually more cost to this change order at $225 an hour. I've already been here an hour. These are some of the impact costs. And they're looking at me going, Robin, I know you don't make that kind of money. And I have to explain to them, no, you can see right here in my order, I'm charging $95, but this is the loss of opportunity that you're paying for as well. So use some of those tactics and make sure that you don't ignore those values. Here's an example of a typical change order request. You'll notice in here that there's some conduit fittings. There's an item, and if you look at this on your screens, and if you can see that pretty well, if you not, when you get the video, you can look at it. But there's a couple items that are missing labor. So these are things that we want to address. Now, where's that labor being picked up? In a lot of NECA labor units, they're being picked up with other elements. You don't always have labor on couplings, as an example, because they have the labor built in with the raceway. If in question, look it up. Look at the NECA referencing. There's a lot of NECA referencing information to explain those labor units. You can always provide a labor unit on those components. What I would tell you not to do is go in there and start playing around with NECA's labor. If it says it's, you know, 28.4 man hours there, I wouldn't go playing with that number, falsifying that value. That is your book standard. If you do need to make a concession with a client, you can always make a concession with a discount or an add to those units, but I would not doctor those units up, because that's what's going to validate your world. Concern also that I would have for you a little bit is labor units that are not NECA, the means labor units, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But I gave very concise. I gave a point for the client to accept that. I itemized the information without exposing too much data. Like I said, if you saw a credit on there, you would not see an itemized list of credit. You would see a credit of the value and a very thorough explanation of that credit up in the work description. Now, to protect yourself, make sure that you have some of these legal statements or protection statements in your. We've got some standards in ours. These are those standards that come right out of our default. These are encouraged, obviously, to use. We reserve the right to correct those errors and omissions. There's a lot of errors and omissions that likely won't be ascertained until the very late in the project, once we see how the ripple effect of this change occurred throughout our project schedule. But cover the quote for direct costs only, like impact and consequential costs. So there we have a value acceptance of doing so. The days extension and the acceptance minimization, those are considerations based on where the project is. The project's moving very quickly. They got to have an acceptance in a much shorter time, or if this is one of your critical path elements, you want acceptance even shorter than that, 1 or 2 days. Otherwise, once again, the impact is going to be too great. Time extension, make sure that that's a valid based on the hours that you're looking at, that doesn't require additional shift work, but also remember to cover those costs of that extension. Indirect consequential costs using that measurement model. The costs and price will qualify right up front. Like I said, using that measured mile method that we talked about yesterday is, like I said, very underutilized. If we start tracking the information and we start looking for those trends, tools like Microsoft Project helps us with that greatly. We actually have a seminar that we offer at our user conferences that talks about how to use that tool a little bit more on your day-to-day lives. Even though it's not a product we sell, we try to help you integrate from your original estimate budget and manage from that. Labor rate breakdown. Now, once again, go back, look at your breakdowns, make sure that you're getting these costs built in. In this case, I've got a wage of $45 an hour that's paid to my journeyman. By the time I put all the incidental elements, the influences of that labor in here, I've got a total of $81.12. Now, once again, numbers aren't accurate. You need to make them accurate for yourself, and you need to have that at your beck and call so that you can validate that pricing, especially in those first change orders that you're submitting. That labor unit, if you notice, I'm not creating one for helpers, or I'm not creating one for apprentices, those type of things, because I'm going to base that rate on journeyman performance hours, and that's where those NECA hours are in play. You might want to do that, though, for your supervision and project management to help them understand why those costs are where they're at. Breakdown of your general expenses. Here's some examples of utility costs, the phone costs, the consumables that are taken throughout the day, but also things like as-built drawings, times that you're going to spend after, even though it's not a consumption date today, there is going to be a consumption of time because of these changes that we're doing. That in the past has been a much greater value that we've had to add with a lot of the electronic software, as well as some of the electronic tools that we talked about yesterday, the scanners, the total stations, that can be reduced because it can actually be compiled for us during the build of the project. But there will still be cleanup, there'll still be presentation that you'll need to add. Equipment rental rates. One of the best things you can do for your company is create a rental book. Have that as an attachment to your contract. Make sure that you maintain that and keep it current. Simply put, ladders, specialty tools, things that you already own, you supply on a project. I'd say pretty much any tool outside of what your labor provides for themselves is something that we would want to have on that rental book. In calculating that value, take the cost, replacement cost of that element, of course, add any maintenance to it, consumables to it, and then divide it by the life expectancy of the tool. This is a tool you replace every year, every 6 months. Now you're getting a value that you can then divide into daily, hourly, weekly rental. Create that book, and like I said, make an attachment and put a time date on it, by the way, as well, so it'll validate in court. If you don't put a time date on it, it can often get thrown out of litigation court. All right. Defining the overhead. Overhead, quite frankly, as we mentioned, is the elements of cost that we would have if we had no work. So these are some of the examples of those things. There's different variations depending on that, but simply put, that's what we're looking at. So legal accounting fees, the president's salary, a sales force, possibly an estimator to estimate those if the owner's not doing that for themselves to get work. What is not overhead? Anything that would be related to the expense on a project. Don't let them push us around, and especially in the contract signings, don't miss that clause where they're trying to tell you that these things are overhead and need to be included in your 10 and 5 or your 10 and 10 that you're being provided for. Here's illustrations of that. You think office equipment would be overhead. It's not. Not if I don't need superintendents and project managers using that equipment, then it's not overhead. That's job cost. So define that. Where are we at? Time. All right. But these are not. All right. Let's get to some negotiating philosophy. All right. Understand the emotions of I'm going to kind of read this. This is a really good narrative that came off of the legal site that I'll have on the third day, some referencing material for you all to start going out and using as well that I've learned during the research of this. So bear with me. This is not my own tone. I'm going to just read through this. Understand the emotions of price selection can help us to implement an effective change order process, boost the contractor's profitability, enhance the business reputation in the eyes of our customers. Two aspects of pricing philosophy. Every contractor should take into account when putting change order procedures in place, there's a price leverage and a payment resistance. The price leverage is not so much the advantage held by one party over the other. It is a question of who at the most or least is price sensitive at that given time. I think that's the key element here. We don't just assume that the client's going to always be the one that's price sensitive. It's going to shift. Prior to the work being done, the contractor typically has the advantage because we're going to get that presented to them. We're going to get that signature. We have that need that we need to have dealt with. So we have the implementation. Of course, we have, if you will, that power in our hand at that moment. If we do the work and we let that reside to the end of the project, we have just literally shifted that power right into our client's hands and made it much more difficult for us. So the contractor has the best opportunity at that time to receive the maximum amount for the requested change and improve the profitability of his or her company. After the work is done, the price leverage shifts to the customer and you're left scrambling. So unless the unwillingness to pay, the payment resistance is often the direct result of the customer not feeling empowered in the change process. You've kind of taken that away from them because you did not provide any pricing to them for them to make a logical decision. You proceeded with the work, you did the work, and then you're shocking them with a value of that work. So that's what I mean by shifting the power. They don't often understand our business, and so helping them relate it to their business is one of your key elements in winning over that client. So The customer is often caught off guard when the bill arrives very late, larger than they expected, and of course the work is then completed. So be very cautious of that and stop that practice, quite frankly. All right, this is where you get to become what I've been, and you get to become a salesman. We are all salesmen, though. Like I said, a lot of us don't conceive ourselves as that, but we do need to increase our sales skills. So don't be afraid to take online classes or read some sales books, because there's a lot of value in understanding the position the client's in, understanding the body language cues that you're going to see, listening for buy terms when a client's obviously committed and they're just holding out, hoping that you'll drop another percentage or two off the number, and when to kind of hold firm with that negotiation. Expect objections to what you're doing and have a plan for those objections. So practice, whether in mirror, practice on other colleagues, practice this approach to sales. It is a necessary tool to make our lives much more fluid with getting these values. Be soft-spoken, respectful. The biggest thing about sales, I will tell you, is listening. Stop talking, sit back, listen to the client's needs, and then respond to those client's needs. Help the client understand the direction you had to steer the boat to get to the client's end result. Use terms like you're seeing here. With all due respect, we pride ourselves in being fair with our clients and our suppliers. Ask around. Use your reputation. Don't be afraid to take a client that you've had a great experience with and keep that relationship up and use that relationship to help you. In my world, it's referencing other clients, being able to say, listen, talk to one of your peers here and how my solution brought value to you. Watch for these skillful maneuvers that you're going to get from the client. You've heard most of these. So these are a good list to keep, good list to practice your responses to these type of things. Keep in mind your responses will shift depending on whether this is a controlled change or a directed change. Some of these things are going to shift in how you respond. Keep the control of that negotiation. One of the things we don't want to do is burn the client to the point that the client goes out and starts shopping us. And for those of you that have seen that happen, where you're on a project and all of a sudden another electrical contractor is trying to show up on that project to do some of this work, you need to obviously have a conversation not only with the client but your peers in the community. Here's some of the quick things that you can do to shift that power. Ask the client to tell you what's wrong with this, not just the price. Is my quantities wrong? Dissect it. Are my materials not correct? Did we not use the column 3? And like I said, the empowerment you have with this is if you made these attachments in your contract, there's no argument to these values now. So, in conclusion, successful negotiation requires professionalism. That's without being said, but it really requires practice. The project manager or the superintendent who's addressing this or the owner needs to be comfortable but confident in their values. You're going to get that competency by practicing. Same with doing anything in your day-to-day. The management skills is having that confidence. Have that confidence right from the get-go and make sure that you set yourself up for that success. Contractors have lost a lot of money due to changes. Collective adopting the proper change order process is what we're all here today to talk about. We are going to give you some of these tools. Like I said, this is a snippet of an 8-hour course that we have offered in the past. So some of that we've migrated to the Constructable site. If none of you or some of you have not been to this site, this is a great resource site that is constantly being added to. The Marcom team here, Melly and Lindsay and the team that you've met here on the phone, they manage this and put a lot of data. We're constantly carrying information, not just internally to this, but we have a lot of connections in the market space, peers in the market space as well that contribute to this. At the end of tomorrow, I'll also have a slide for you of some of the resources I use to collect this data here, besides the main resource of the reality seminar that Giovanni Marcelli started roughly 30 years ago and has carried into the market space. So we're actually a little bit early. I'll let you actually have a little bit of your day back, because we're at the point for tomorrow where we'll do a product demonstration and go through that product.
Awesome. Thank you, Robin, and thank you everyone for joining us for day 2. As a reminder, all questions can be submitted to the form. I've left the link in the chat box of this as well. So you can go ahead and use that, and we will answer all questions, or as many as we have time for, on tomorrow for day 3. Thank you guys. Have a great day.